Keep your shirt on. Who's disappeared? What do you suppose I appeared for? Just to give you guys a thrill? You don't have to issue any warrants. I'll stay here. If she's guilty, I'm guilty. You damn... I do. Lawrence Reagan. Unemployed. 5 months. In Faulkner's office. I went there to do some business with him. I gave up the business because I met his secretary. Well, that first meeting wasn't exactly friendly. She wouldn't let me in to see Faulkner. She said I had enough money to buy orchids by the pound, and I had no business with her boss. I said I'd think it over, and went. I thought it over, only I didn't think of the business. I thought of her. The next day I sent her a pound of orchids. Ever see how many that makes? That's how it started. I knew it before I ever saw her. What of it? I knew it was hopeless, but I couldn't help it. No. Do you have to know all that? I kissed her. Once. By force. It was the night of the Faulkner's wedding. She was alone. She was so unhappy, and I was so crazy about her. She told me it was no use. I never wanted her to know, but she knew. We never mentioned it since. About 2 weeks before we pulled it. No. No. No, I just had a way of guessing. It all worked as Miss Android had told you, but she knows only half the story. I know the rest. I left 10 minutes after Faulkner. He had taken my car. I had one of my men leave another car for me at the door. I stepped on it, full speed, to Meadow Lane, 10 miles out in Kings County. I had left my plane there earlier in the evening. Faulkner was to get there first and wait for me. About midnight, there was a bright moon. I turned off the road and I could see tire tracks in the mud where Faulkner's car had passed. I drove out into the lane. Then I thought I'd lost my mind. The plane was gone. I searched around that lane for 2 hours. Faulkner's car was there, where we had agreed to hide it. It was empty. Lights turned off, the key in the switch. I saw tracks on the ground, but the plane had taken off. But Faulkner couldn't fly it himself. I searched like a bloodhound. I did. One thing. A car. It was hidden deep in the bushes on the other side of the lane. It was a big black sedan. I wanted to know whose car it was, so I smashed the window, crawled into the back seat, and settled down to wait the rest of that night. Then the owner came back. I saw him coming. His face looked queer. He had no hat. His clothes were wrinkled and grease-spotted. I pretended to be asleep in the back seat. I watched him. He approached, opened the door. Then he saw me. He gave a start and a yell, as if he'd been struck in the heart. His nerves must have been jittery. I awakened with a start, stretched, rubbed my eyes, and said, "Oh, it's you. Fancy such a meeting." I don't think he liked it. He asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I said, "My name's Guts Reagan. You may have heard it. I was in a little trouble and had to hide for a while. And finding this car here was quite a convenience." He said, "That's too bad, but I'll have to ask you to get out. I'm in a hurry." No, I stretched and asked. What's the hurry? He said. None of your business. I smiled and explained. It's not for me. You see, it happens a certain columnist is a friend of mine. He'll appreciate the story about a gentleman of your prominence found wandering in the wilderness at milk time. But I'm sure he would like to have the whole story. He said nothing. He took out a checkbook and looked at me. I shrugged and looked at him. Then he said, would $5,000 be a suitable token of appreciation to keep your mouth shut? I said, it'll do. Lawrence Reagan's the name. He wrote out the check. Here it is. Let the clerk read that check to you. I put it in my pocket and thanked him. Then I drew my gun and stuck it in his ribs and asked, now you lousy bastard, what'd you do with Faulkner? He opened his mouth like a fish, choking, and couldn't make a sound. At first he muttered, I don't know what you're talking about. But I jammed the gun harder and said, cut it out. I've no time to waste. I'm in on it and so are you. Where'd you take him? He said, if you kill me, you'll never find out. Not a word. I didn't want to kill him. Yet. He said, if you expose me, you'll expose a fake suicide and Faulkner will be found. I asked, is he alive? He said, go and ask him. I talked and threatened. It was no use. I let him go. I thought I could always get to him. I didn't lose a second. I rushed home, changed my clothes, grabbed a sandwich and an airplane, and flew to Buenos Aires. I searched. I advertised in the papers. I got no answer. No one called at the banks for Ragnar Hayden's millions. No, we had promised to stay away from each other for a month, and she'd been arrested for Faulkner's murder. I laughed when I read that. I couldn't say a word, not to betray him if I was still alive. I waited. February 16th, at the Hotel Continental in Buenos Aires. I set my teeth and waited every minute of every hour of that day. He didn't come. Then I knew he was dead. I came back to New York. I started a search for my plane. We found it yesterday. In a deserted valley in New Jersey, 100 miles from Meadow Lane. I recognized the plane by the engine number. It had been landed and fire set to it. No, I found the body of a man in it. No one could. It was nothing but a burnt skeleton. But the height was the same. It was Faulkner. I examined the body, what was left of it. I found 2 bullet holes. One in a rib over the heart. The other straight through the right hand. He didn't die without putting up a fight. He must have been disarmed first. Shot through the hand, then murdered, defenseless, straight through the heart. You'd like me to answer, wouldn't you? I'm legally allowed not to understand what you're talking about. You may. Question me. Occasionally. A remarkable coincidence, Miss Flint, just after the guests left. No? I cut his throat with a dull saw. I loved her. I had nothing to say about that. Got any proof of that? I can give you his exact address. Evergreen Cemetery, Whitfield Family Memorial, which is the swankiest place poor Lefty's ever been. Yes. When he speaks, his manner is a startling contrast to his former arrogance and irony. It is simple, sincere, It is almost solemn in its earnestness. Miss Flint, you're a district attorney, and well, you know what I am. We both have a lot of dirty work to do. Such happens to be life, or most of it. But do you think we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof. Second time. But do you think we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof.